Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Patriots History. I'm Larry Swikart, co-author of Patriots History of the United States. Now in its 41st printing, we have for you an updated 20th anniversary edition. It's yours free. I'd appreciate it if you'd sign up for the newsletter. Go on wildworldofhistory.com, scroll way down and sign up for the newsletter. You should get it free, but if you don't get it right away, email me at larry@wildworldofhistory.com, and I'll make sure you get it. It consists of a single chapter from 2018 to 2023 in PDF form, but also about 20 pages of inserted material. You're going to have to, when you come to the right place, say, now I've got to go over here and read this part. But it's new material, new research that I found throughout the rest of the book. And I think you'll really appreciate that. And again, that's all free. Just sign up for the newsletter or email me at larry@wildworldofhistory.com. Also, if you're interested in this, I have a full curriculum that goes with Patriots History of the United States. I teach every lesson in high production video with charts, graphs, images behind me. 22 chapters, 22 lessons, 22 videos. It's all digital, all downloadable, goes from Columbus to Trump in the course of 1 year, and there's no license to expire. It's yours as long as you want it with as many kids as you want it. So I also have a world history course, 1775 to the present, same business, 15 episodes, 15 videos. The units are much bigger. The videos are a little longer. No license to expire, and so on. So check those out. All right. We are in chapter 10, the ideals and realities of Reconstruction. Again, as always, I am using the 15th anniversary edition of Patriots History of the United States. If you have a much earlier edition, the pages certainly won't line up. It's possible the headers won't line up. We are under the header O. Howard and the Freedmen's Bureau, and I am starting my reading on page 386 at the very bottom of the page. On the other hand, the Bureau hardly constituted an early form of Great Society welfarism. Certainly, it increased the size and scope of federal government operations. For example, it supervised more than 3,000 schools, serving 150,000 Southern students, demanding a massive amount of oversight. And without argument, the Bureau wasted money and in some cases encouraged indolence. Yet in the short term, the Freedmen's Bureau was indispensable. More than 90% of the students in Reconstruction schools were Black, and they were provided with education they would never have received in elite Southern private schools. Keeping them in school, however, proved difficult. One estimate of Black student attendance between 1865 and 1870 was 5%. And for whites, it was only 20% of the enrollment. Reformers had an answer for that too, pushing as they did in the North for mandatory school attendance laws, again expanding the scope of government power. The most enduring contribution of the Freedmen's Bureau was its commitment to the African-American self-sufficiency, if not equality, and Southerners knew it. Quote, "The black ball is in motion," unquote, lamented Mary Chestnut. And once rolling, racist whites couldn't only slow it down, not stop it. Some whites hoped that by teaching Blacks to support themselves, white Southerners would quickly return to their rightful place atop the social ladder. Johnson's amnesty proclamation seemed to confirm Black fears when former Confederates learned that when their citizenship rights are restored, their confiscated property would be returned as well. Or in language plain to the freedmen, no plantations would be broken up for 40 acres and a mule. Left-wing historians often leap to make the land issue solely about race. Two other important considerations, however, guided Johnson as he came to his amnesty sans confiscation decision. First, simply put, there were more whites and Blacks in the South. At minimum, there were 2 potential white troublemakers for every disgruntled Black. In meting out justice, however unfair, sheer numbers are always a calculation. Second, whites were voters, or in the South, potential voters, whereas blacks were not, at least realistically, not in the large numbers unless escorted by troops. No policy could survive long if Southern whites and those Northerners who feared black social equality formed a political alliance to oust Johnson and the radicals, even if somehow they formed an unlikely united front. Johnson, these were not minor considerations. To accuse Johnson of abandoning the Negro, though in essence true, nevertheless obscures the political realities confronting him. Moreover, Johnson's own preferences were to elevate poor whites, not create black competitors for them. But Freedmen's Bureau provided a qualified answer to the third Reconstruction question. The South, in an extremely limited way, could be made to comply with some of the Northern Reconstruction agenda through clear direction and, above all, a heavy application of force. But in the broadest sense of racial harmony, genuine political equality, and diffuse economic growth, Reconstruction could not change either human nature or historical prejudice. At any rate, the conflict between Johnson and Howard spotlighted the last Reconstruction question: who would direct Reconstruction for the remainder of its life, the legislative or the executive branch? A war on four fronts. Congress, disenchanted with Johnson's slow pace, had already started to gain control of the direction of Reconstruction. Four concurrent conflicts took place from late 1865 to 1876, and each had the potential to dramatically reshape American life. The first battle pitted Congress against the presidency for policy dominance. Laments about Lincoln's untimely death obscure the fact that had the great man lived, it would have made little difference to radicals in Congress who, although they may have despised the Tennessee tailor, Johnson, were hardly cowed by Lincoln. A second clash involved Northerners seeking to cement their commercial and political superiority over the South into a permanent hierarchy. Third, the Republican Party intended to emasculate, if not destroy, the opposition Democratic Party, which perhaps they should have done. And fourth, a tension between whites and blacks over social, political, and economic equality that had only started to play out in both sections, but mostly below the Mason-Dixon line. In this last dimension, the radicals had, for the most part, been open and straightforward about their goals. They had argued for abolition from the beginning of the war, and they were, quote, if anything, somewhat less opportunistic in their purposes and a little more candid in their public utterances than the average American politician, unquote. George W. Julian of Indiana, for example, lectured fellow Republicans saying, quote, the real trouble is that we hate the Negro. It is not his ignorance that offends us, but his color. Let one rule be adopted for white and black alike, unquote. Other radicals warned Northerners that the rights of black and white laborers were synonymous, and above all, they maintained a fever pitch of moral frenzy begun during the war. Quote, absolute right must prevail, unquote, said a Chicago radical, while editor E.L. Godkin predicted that accepting the doctrine that the United States was subject only to, quote, white man's government would make the name of American democracy, quote, a hissing and a byword, unquote, among the people of the earth. Sentiments such as these refute the notion that the egalitarianism of radical Reconstruction was merely a facade for Northern economic dominance. As the new Congress considered Johnson's Reconstruction program, it became increasingly clear to radicals that although blacks in the South could not vote, they nevertheless counted 100% instead of 60% toward representation in the House, giving the Southern Democrats even more seats in the House of Representatives than they had before the war. As this incredible reality sank in, the Republican-dominated Congress reacted by refusing to seat the representatives of any of the Southern governments. Quote, I am not very anxious, wrote Thaddeus Stevens in a moment of great candor, to see Southern votes cast along with others to control the next election, unquote. This played a crucial role in the shaping of the subsequent 14th Amendment, in which the radicals proportionally reduced representation in the House to any state denying voting rights to the freedmen. Johnson and the Northern Democrat allies, along with the leaders of the reconstructed neo-Confederate governments, accepted at the outset that blacks were incapable of exercising citizenship rights. The chasm, quote, between the two races in physical, mental, and moral characteristics, unquote, Johnson wrote in his third inaugural message to Congress. That doesn't sound right, does it? I guess it does, yeah. Calculating, yeah, it was right. Quote, will prevent an amalgamation or fusion of them together in one homogeneous mass. Blacks were, quote, inferior, and if they ever gained political power, it would result in, quote, tyranny such as this continent has never yet witnessed, unquote. In February 1866, Johnson won his last victory over Congress when he vetoed an extension of the Freedmen's Bureau on the grounds that until the 11 southern states are restored to the Union, Congress had no authority to pass such legislation. Congress sustained his veto, but the radicals stepped up their campaign against him. Sumner described Johnson as, quote, an insolent, drunken brute, and Stevens called him, quote, an alien enemy of a foreign state. Here was Johnson, who seldom drank and whose loyalty to the Union was such that he was the only senator from a secessionist state to stay in office during the war, was accused of drunkenness and treason. Arrayed against Johnson and his dwindling alliance, the radicals saw their influence grow. Thaddeus Stevens best expressed their position when he rejected the notion held by Southerners that the government of the United States is, quote, a white man's government, unquote. Quote, this man's government, the government of all men alike, he countered. He therefore advocated full political equality, though not social equality, calling it, quote, a matter of taste, unquote, as though other people shared their seats at the dinner table with blacks. Between the radicals on one side and the former Confederates on the other stood the so-called moderates. By the way, the great Rush Limbaugh always had a good line, show me the statue to the great moderate. Where do you see any statues to great moderates anywhere? You don't, because moderates change nothing. It is the people on the extremes who force a decision one way or another who are always remembered in history, whether it's a William Wallace, whether it's a Napoleon, whether it's a Lincoln, whether it's an FDR or a Reagan, they're not the moderates. Thaddeus Stevens best expressed their position when he rejected the notion held by Southerners that the government of the United States was a white man's government. I'm sorry. Between the radicals on one side and the former Confederates on the other stood so-called moderates. There we go. Moderates hated the black codes and wanted Republican dominance of the South, but they rejected full political equality for blacks. See, they rejected full political equality for blacks, but they also rejected destroying the Democrat Party, which was created solely to enslave blacks. See what being a moderate gets you? They agreed with radicals, though, that something had to be done about laws passed by the restored yet still rebellious governments in the South, and together the two groups passed the Civil Rights Act of 1866, defining blacks as U.S. citizens and promising them, quote, full and equal benefit of all laws and all proceedings for the security of person and property as it enjoyed by white citizens, unquote. This law made it a federal crime to deprive someone of his civil rights and, in conjunction with new Freedmen's Bureau law, established Army tribunals to enforce civil rights cases. Johnson promptly vetoed the bill, citing a number of objections. He disliked the absence of a period of adjustment to citizenship that normally occurred with alien immigrants. Social discrimination areas such as interracial marriage, he thought, was also necessary. His main concern, though, were over upsetting the balance of power between the states and the federal government. Johnson argued that the Civil Rights Act violated the 10th Amendment. Congress narrowly passed the Civil Rights Act over his veto thanks to the illness of one pro-Johnson voter who stayed home and the defection of a New York Democrat. Aside from Gideon Welles, all of Johnson's own cabinet opposed him. Johnson's initial veto was sustained, but Congress wrote an amended version, which Johnson also vetoed and which Congress overrode. It was increasingly clear that Andrew Johnson would not support that in any way significantly improve the status of the African Americans. During the debate over the 14th Amendment, Johnson's views had become even more transparent. Aware that Southerners would immediately bring a court challenge to the Civil Rights Act, Republican legislators moved to make it permanent through the 14th Amendment, stating all persons born or naturalized in the United States are subject to jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and the state in which they reside. So this made citizenship national rather than subject to state authority, making a sea change in the understanding of the source rights of the United States. No state could, quote, abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States or deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without the due process of law. Nor could any state deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. So it's very important, as I've said before, prior to the Civil War, you would have said when asked, I'm a Frenchman, who are you? Oh, I'm a Virginian. Or I'm a Yankee from New Hampshire, or I'm an Ohioan. But after the Civil War, slowly you became an American who was from Virginia, or an American who was from Indiana. In other words, your identification as an American came first. And this is very important. And as we get up to in the very end of this class, the Dobbs decision on abortion, I think there is still a ways to go. There is no doubt this is the most popular and reasonable way of dealing with abortion now in terms of getting it out of people's hair. The states that want abortion, like California and New York, can have it. Those who want to limit it, whether it's Kansas or Alabama, can, but it dodges the crucial question right here of federal civil rights, because you have the right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. And as an unborn baby, I think you're being denied that right. And I think the Supreme Court deliberately ducked that question. And I'm not sure they can duck it forever. It may still come back because ultimately at some point they're going to have to decide if a person's rights begin at birth, if they begin before birth, where is a person invested with the rights of an American citizen? And I'm not sure they've yet dealt with that. Subsequently, all state legislation regarding infringements on the Bill of Rights would have to be subjected to federal review. It was a sweeping accomplishment in defining the rights of all American citizens as equal. Some, however, were more equal than others. While granting citizenship to the freedmen, the 14th Amendment simultaneously denied citizenship to high Confederate office holders. See, this is the problem. We keep coming back to this because of his great desire. You understand it, his great desire to unite the nation as quickly as possible and to see the secessionist Southern states as our brothers and our kin and our friends. Lincoln did not take the necessary step of calling it treason. And this was going to lead to a whole host of problems. You could not confiscate the property of Southern plantation owners because they were American citizens, but you could if they'd been traitors. You have people being hit with jail terms or denied public office, as most of the Confederate officers were, but that wasn't the case with blacks who just previously been slaves. So there were a whole lot of holes in this, and they would become obvious over time. All right, I think that's a pretty good place to stop right there. We will pick up next time here on page 390. on paragraph 1 to the third full paragraph. All right. So I'll see you out there next time. I'll try and get another one in on tomorrow. And till then, stay wild.